Kia ora, and welcome to week 8 of fiction writing. This week, once again, I asked the tutors to teach on this course. I said, what should we talk about in the video? And they suggested two things, and I'm just going to take their suggestions. They suggested setting, and imagery in setting, and imagery in characterization. So those sound like pretty good places to start for me. First of all, just to talk a little bit about setting. To my mind, for me as a writer, personally, setting isn't really just the place where the story takes place. It isn't just sort of the frame or the box around the story. Something about a story, for me, usually comes out of that place. And I tried to capture that in the writing exercises. If you remember all the way back to the very first writing exercise, it was called Grounded. And basically it asks you to, you could take a look at it and maybe go back to it and try it again. It asks you to imagine a place, locate someone in that place. And that is essentially how I begin most of my stories, right there. And even, to my mind, a novel begins to some degree out of the place. And what does that mean? Well, it means that we're grounded as readers when we experience a story where we can see it happening, where we have a sense of what it sounds like to walk over that gravel. We know a little bit what the sky looks like reflected on that window or that tap. We can picture ourselves there and put ourselves there. So one of the things that beginning writers sometimes do when they just begin with story, they just begin with idea, is they write a story that could pretty much be set anywhere in the world. But our story should be set in one place, where people could almost sort of find it on the map, right? They can see a couple details. They recognize those two Nikau palms over there by that playground, and they know that, oh, yep, that must be the playground up by, Hardin Road or whatever. And so they have a sense that it's very much grounded in that place. And I'll just give you a real quick example. I'm going to use Tracy Slaughter's story 22 to talk about both place and then imagery and character as well. But on the very first page of her story 22, the narrator is in this house where he's doing this sort of gun check interview. And he says, I knelt down to tie up my shoelace at one point, and under my palm, I could feel the smelt in the pile. It put me off, that gluey fried scent. Yeah. Which is just a horrible detail of place, but very much grounds us in this particular place. It grounds us not just by visualization, but that smell. And smell is an important part of place and one that really is quite grounding. So when you write a story, you should pretty much have a good sense of exactly where it's taking place and communicate that. Not in an overbearing or overdetermined way to readers. Oftentimes one little detail like that, one piece of imagery, can communicate quite a lot. So similarly, tutor asked me to take a look at imagery and characterization. Just to get started thinking about imagery, some exercises you might do just to get you thinking about language really in the most general way are from the unit on language. So prose consommé, which is a somewhat complicated and roundabout exercise, but it really tries to boil down your language a little bit. Quilts of plagiarism, and your words shall set you free or not. Those are some exercises to get you thinking about language. So when we talk about imagery for characters, what we're talking about again is being able to see that character really, really clearly as if they were sitting there in front of us. So again, taking a look at the first page of Tracy Slaughter's 22, here's an image that just jumps off the page for me. Immediately, I'm in this space, and I know a lot of information is contained here, even though much of it isn't said explicitly. So the narrator is describing this character that he meets here, collarbones. And even that word, collarbones, there's something sort of a little bit bleak and desolate about it. We hear the bone protruding from the word as the collarbone protrudes from the shoulder. So the sound of words can contribute to the imagery, both of the setting and of the character as well. But I'll read this. Collarbones. I remember those, too high under her yellow t-shirt. Her elbows were thin for the plastic table where she leaned, blue and scuffed at the tip. I mean, the sense of the blue on the elbows, almost suggesting that she's sort of half dead, which, as we see, is pretty much true. But again, the sound of those words is doing a lot for the imagery here. Plastic table, blue, scuffed tip. There's a sense that this is kind of thick language that's hard to get through. And that kind of reflects, I think, the narrator's experience of sitting there in that kitchen and how difficult it is for him to get through it. The other place, of course, where we can show character, we talked about dialogue last week, and I warned you a little bit about some of the pearls of dialogue. On the other hand now, just to contradict myself, a well-placed line of dialogue can do a tremendous amount for a story. And I'm just thinking here, I'm on page 187 of the original 16 of the original, 187 of my study guide. And this is, again, Tracy Slaughter's 22. And I will just read this here. He's interviewing this protagonist about this main character about the gun shack, about her husband, and she just says this one simple line, and there's nothing unusual or unrealistic in the line, but in the context of the story, this line holds a particular weight. So she says, he says, well, why do you think it's okay for him to have a gun? And she says, because he follows rules. He's very aware of rules. He always follows them, and he makes sure others do. That's a terrifying, chilling line. Not just because we know what happens in the story, but just the way she delivers it tells us much about his character. That sort of short-clipped, commanding kind of voice, and the repetition of rules, the repetition of the sentence structures, because he follows rules. He's very aware of rules. He always follows them, and he makes sure others do. Now, we know the others is the person speaking and their children. And with those kind of command-like sentences, she makes us aware of her own experience, and she makes us aware of an attribute of this character that she's talking about. So there's dialogue functioning really, really well, revealing a tremendous amount about two different characters in the story. And it's only two quick, short lines of dialogue. So I guess I see we're a little bit over the time I usually do, so I'll stop there. But the main thing I think to consider is, are you communicating this world? How are you communicating this world to your reader? Can they sense where it is? Can they see these people? Do they have a sense for how these people will act and react? A little bit there on detail in setting and imagery, in setting and in character. And looking forward to talking to you next week. I hope your writing's going really well. We've got the second round of workshopping coming up. That should be fun. It's always a little more fun than the first round because you know what you're doing. So enjoy yourself. Take care.